Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. There are still folks trickling in, so we'll just give it a moment or two before we get started. And so as we're waiting, it's nice to see some familiar names, but also some new names. So again, welcome to everyone who's joining us today. Okay, so there are still a few folks trickling in, but I think we have a very meaty session today, so I think we should get started. So again, welcome to all of you who have joined us today to hear more about our next funding competition. We'll have lots of opportunity for you to ask questions, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we are located in the National Capital Region. I'm located in Ottawa, and I'd like to acknowledge and recognize the land in which we are on, and we are on the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe peoples. We acknowledge and respect our traditional hosts, and we thank them for allowing us to operate on this land. And we'd like to have you all take a moment to recognize the lands that you are on, knowing that we are a national entity and coming from many different locations here today. So before we begin, I would just like to highlight that this video session will be recorded and we will be posting it to our website. The link is here, and you'll also find it being posted by one of my colleagues in the chat box. You can look in both of those spaces. This presentation will be delivered in English, but we will have the recorded video offered with subtitles in both French and English. In addition to that, we will be posting this slide deck in the same location on our landing page. And so in terms of how we'll answer questions, please use the chat box, and those questions will be upvoted. We'll be looking at them closely, and we'll either answer them dynamically throughout as the topics arise, but we also will be facilitating a Q&A session at the end. And so with that being said, a number of you indicated that you're new to BioCanRx. So the next couple of slides will just give you a little bit of an introduction about who we are. So BioCanRx was founded in 2015. We've been federally funded ever since then, and our current funding is from the Government of Canada's Strategic Science Fund. We are a network of key stakeholders in the area of cancer immunotherapy translational research, ranging from scientists, clinicians, trainees, patient partners, NGOs, industry, and research institutions. And ultimately, we're coming together because we know it takes a village to accelerate these therapies from bench to bedside. Our goal is to position Canada as a global leader in this area, and really we are striving to be a recognized country for advancing these made in Canada cancer immunotherapies all the way from proof of concept through to translation and manufacturing and to patient access and adoption. With that, our vision is to cure and enhance the quality of life of those living with cancer. And our mission is to accelerate to the clinic the most promising cancer biotherapeutics or cancer immunotherapies designed to save lives and enable a better quality of life. And so those of you who are working in this space know there is a very fundamental valley of death that we refer to as the translational gap. And this is the area that really is getting that product from early phase, from off the bench through to early phase clinical trial. And that is where we predominantly invest our funding. And we'll talk a lot more about that today. But I just wanted to highlight that we also have a lot of work going on that is really supporting the broader ecosystem and activities that are really speaking to policy, to community outreach, to regulatory engagement, and to other activities that are really fundamental to deliver on our promise and to deliver on our mandate. So today's section is going to focus on our funding competition, and our funding competition is really built around a pipeline approach to translational research investments. And this slide is a snapshot, essentially, of the different funding programs that we offer. Over the course of this webinar, we're going to be diving into all of them, with the exception of the Catalyst program that will not be part of this funding competition. I'm happy to answer questions about that at the end. But with that being said, essentially, it's a research program that is really meant to be stage gated, but provide a continuum, of funding to support those different translational stages with an ultimate goal of getting to clinical trial and to get to ultimate adoption with our partners that are involved in these projects. In addition, we support investments to core facilities and to all of the elements that are important and that we know have been identified as both facilitators and barriers to the ultimate adoption of these therapies that we're innovating in Canada. So with that being said, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the team, the research team. Our team is greater than this, but it's led by Doctors John Bell, our scientific director, and Stephanie Michaud, our president and CEO. And I'd like to give a huge shout out to Julie and Mackenzie, who are on the call today. And I've asked them to turn on their camera to do a little virtual wave here, who are really essential to delivering on this program. So with that being said, apologies, some of these slides are a bit wordy and a bit painful, but they're for the benefit of the PDF at the end. But essentially what you're looking at here are all of the elements that are part of the open call guidelines document. And really this document is the fundamental list of instructions and detailed information necessary to put in an application to our programming. And so broadly speaking, we'll touch on all of these to one level of detail or another. And that decision is made based on the frequently asked questions that we've had over the years, and also based on the questions that were presented to us as part of the informational webinar. So to begin, this slide is almost a 30,000-foot view, frequently asked question response. So in terms of the objectives of this open call, we are trying to achieve three different things that really, again, ultimately achieve our mandate. The first is to develop and translate promising cancer immunotherapies enabling technologies from bench to bedside, or rather from proof of concept through to clinical application. We're trying to identify and address the barriers and find enablers to the adoption and integration of these therapies into clinical practice in Canada's healthcare systems. And then finally, we support Canadian infrastructure and technologies that are trying to advance these therapies and that are necessary for the development and conduct of these types of projects. In terms of scope for this call, it is quite wide. So essentially, we are defining cancer immunotherapy as any therapeutic product that modulates the immune system. And we're agnostic for cancer indication, for therapeutic innovation. And so if you have a question about your specific technology and the fit according to our scope, please don't hesitate to reach out, and we'll have the contact information at the end of this presentation. Excuse me. In terms of the key funding elements, we offer non-dilutive federal funding to researchers who are located at academic institutions or research institutes or Indigenous organizations and governments. We offer our funding through a matched program, and we'll talk quite a bit more about this. And then finally, as I mentioned, it's a milestone-driven program. So we expect that there are key milestones and deliverables and outputs at the end of your project. In terms of the key application and funding details, it is a two-stage application process. There's a letter of intent, and then this is reviewed. And if it is the case, you will be invited to a full application. For this program and this funding competition, the award date is March 31st, 2027, and our funding will go to March 31st, 2029, but I'll highlight a key element of this in a couple of slides. And then I'd highlight again that this is a monitored competition. The projects that we have within our portfolio are monitored against their stated milestones and deliverables. And this is a very key component to the program, and we can talk about that as well. So over the next few slides, I'm going to break down the key elements of each of the respective programs that we're offering through this competition. We'll start with the Enabling Studies program. This is a program that is up to 3 years. We provide up to $750,000 in funding. It has a 50% matching requirement. And in this case, what we recommend is that there is a lead candidate. There is a pretty strong data set that really suggests that you're ready to bring this product to the next stage. And in terms of what that looks like, it really can vary depending on each individual circumstance. But what we often see in the program is funding to support the process development, the engineering and validation runs, and the ultimate GMP manufacturing of either your vector or, in many cases, your cell product. It can include a whole race of a whole host of other activities that really are essential for developing your data package to bring forward to Health Canada, either through a full CTA package or through the CMC package more specifically. In terms of the clinical trial program, again, this is a program, or this is an award that can last up to 3 years. For the clinical trial program, we fund up to $1 million. And in this case, we expect that there's a matching representation of 60%. So in other words, for the total budget, BioCanRx would support 40% of those costs, and the other 60% would come from eligible partner contributions. Here, we support investigator-initiated early phase clinical trials, but there are some exceptions. And so again, if you have a scenario that you'd like to bring forward, we can certainly address that in an offline conversation. In terms of eligible activities, we're talking about trial costs, manufacturing, correlative studies, and other data that really is trying to provide a better understanding of the innovation that you're bringing forward through clinical trial. In terms of the required deliverables for this program, really what we're talking about is the conduct of a clinical trial with the data package necessary to make a go, no-go decision about moving it forward in the continuum in terms of late stage clinical trial development, for example. In terms of key eligibility criteria, it must be novel, there must be a Canadian content in the approach, and trial sites must be in Canada. And again, here you see a linkage, of course, with the fact that our funding goes to academic researchers. There should be a pre-CTA consultation with Health Canada within the first 3 months of the start date. And then after that period, there's an expectation that you're submitting your CTA within another 3 months. So in other words, you should be getting to CTA 6 months from the award start date. This is something that our RMC monitors very closely, and we can talk a little bit more about that when it comes to the criteria and the evaluation of feasibility. In terms of our next program, this is the Clinical, Social, and Economic Impact Program. And here, this is a program that is also up to 3 years. BioCanRx provides funding up to $215,000. And in this case, in this program, matching funds are not required, but they are encouraged. In terms of the deliverables, I would really refer you to section 4.3 of the guidelines. This is a non-comprehensive version of what can be considered in the scope for this program. But essentially, the goals of this program are to examine facilitators and barriers across a spectrum of activities ranging from social, legal, economic, ethical, regulatory, or health system activities that are important, but maybe limiting the access of these cancer immunotherapies within our translational pipeline or to the ultimate adoption to patients. And so, as you can imagine, that covers a number of different potential activities. And we have a really strong, I hope, strong list in our guidelines document. And in terms of this, I'd actually like to acknowledge and give a big thank you to our Cancer Community Partnership for helping us define the scope of this program. They are a group of over 50 NGOs and charities that are all advocating for cancer research and other cancer activities. And they have really come at this program from a point of view of the patient perspective. And so, as you'll see in bullet point number 2, one of the key elements of this program is to make sure that the activities that you're thinking about are aligning with at least one of the patient-centered outcomes that are listed in 4.3. Another key element of this program is that there There are different ways of approaching this. And again, happy to have an offline conversation, but the projects that will be reviewed most favorably are those that are linked to a project that's funded through what we call our biomedical program. So that is our enabling studies program or our clinical trials program. And so I can provide an example if anyone wishes at the end, but essentially the purpose here is to ensure that as we're advancing the technical innovations, the actual therapeutics, we are building a package and a body of evidence that really supports their ultimate adoption to patient, to actual use. And again, this can look like many different things. A key also to the CSCI program is that the projects really need to identify end users and describe how these findings will be translated into practice, policy, or decision making. I'm just going to peek. I saw a little note that a question may have come in. Perfect. And going back to the clinical trial, and perhaps I'll wait for these questions to the end because I don't want to completely discombobulate us. But there was a question that came in that asked about the clinical trial. So I'll just go back here for a quick moment to say that it's a total of $1 million across 3 years. And in fact, since you raised that question in the chat here, the other point I would make is that in all of these cases, the amount listed on these slides represents the total award across the period of the award, whether that be 1 or 3 years. Okay. And the final program that we're launching in this competition is our core facilities program. This is a program that was really developed to help offset the operational costs that we know are quite hefty in terms of the types of core services that support translational research. And so this is an award that is up to 2 years. It's $120,000 in this case per year, and there is no matching or partnering requirements. Um, we often see salary support. That tends to be, by and large, the most commonly requested activity, but you can certainly request funding or make an application that supports other types of expenses, such as ongoing facility maintenance to meet certain standards, for instance, or other certifications and baseline operations. A key here, and an important note here, is that the number here, the $120,000 award to core facilities, is different and separate from any budgetary line item that an enabling study program or a clinical trial program may request for the services that the core facility offers. In terms of the key the key eligibility criteria, the funding is going to Canadian academic or research institution facilities that offer translational services. Um, Again, at the end, I can show you the facilities that we add, but or have currently funded. But these have traditionally been biomanufacturing facilities, GLP facilities that support immune monitoring, for example, and facilities that provide a lot of the data that, again, is supporting either the biomanufacturing activities or the clinical trial data packages. In terms of the core facilities program, we are not currently seeking to support regulatory commercialization or CRO-like services. And in terms of what we're looking for and that we are supporting, it's the demonstration that if you are applying for core funding, you are engaging with a prospective, either a currently funded or a prospective BioCanRx project. And again, that's to create that linkage and to offset some of those costs that we know are quite high in this type of research. So in terms of how we do this, maybe I'll just take a quick minute to describe that. Essentially, at project intake and at the stage of the LOI, we're working very actively to provide information to the core facilities about the projects upon approval, about the projects that have entered our program, and then conversely, we are speaking with the projects to say which core facilities are applying. And essentially, we're trying to do a little bit of matchmaking and a little bit of engagement regarding who is in the program and who may be applying. And that will come via email in the later stages of this process. So with that, I'm going to jump over and talk a little bit more about the general requirements, and I would bring your attention to Section 5 of the program guidelines. One important note I'd mention is that for many of these slides, I'll be talking predominantly about the Enabling Studies Program, Clinical Trials Program, and the CSCI program. The core facility applications are slightly different just because of the nature of what we're looking to fund. So this slide is taken out of the program guide, but just a reference point before we begin to let you know what it is that we're talking about and just to highlight that if you are looking to receive core support, that the guidelines are slightly different than what I'm talking about, with some, not all, but some of these elements. And so, in terms of what the general requirements are, this is what I would consider to be a highlight slide based on what I see. But essentially, what we're looking for are innovative technologies with data that are appropriate and sufficient to support the program that you're looking to apply. So, for instance, like I mentioned, in the case of the Enabling Studies program, you really do need to have a package that is going to support the end deliverable that is either having a CTA, a full CTA package, or a CMC package at that end of your award term. We're looking for multidisciplinary and collaborative teams, and this includes many different stakeholders, including those individuals with lived or living experience, or what we refer to as the PWLE partners. Where possible, proposals should use Canadian academic or research institution core-like facilities. This is a bit of a jumble of words that really are not only to support core facilities that will ultimately be funded through our program, and that's the ideal, but to support Made in Canada activities. With all of our programs, and this is a fundamental element of the work that we support, there must be a benefit to Canada and to people living in Canada. And as I previously mentioned, and I'll mention again and again, feasibility is a key evaluative component. And as part of the application, you will be required to provide a Gantt and to provide your key milestones and deliverables as part of the application. And so this is not something this slide isn't explicitly in the program guide. It is nuanced and I guess articulated throughout different sections that I refer to here in the yellow box, but this is a question that arose in the registration. So I'll just speak a little bit to what it means to be substantially developed in Canada. Essentially, broadly speaking, the definition is that the technology must have been either substantially conceived of, discovered, optimized, or translated through R&D activities conducted in Canada. Again, there is that linkage that our funding must go to a Canadian academic researcher or Indigenous organization. And then, of course, as I just mentioned, the project outputs are expected to generate meaningful scientific, IP, talent development, or economic benefits for Canada and people in Canada. This is a really short snippet. I do really highly encourage you to read our policy on industry partnered research and also to review the IP policy and essentially the future project and enabling technology development trajectory, which outlines some of the other core elements that speak to the benefit of Canada and the need to have it be substantially developed in Canada. So I'm going to spend, excuse me. I'm going to spend a few slides talking about the research budget and eligibility criteria. This is something that is quite unique, I would say, to the SSF program, and it may be a little bit different in terms of definition to what you may have seen before. So broadly speaking, in terms of thinking about your research budget, I would first say that SSF funds are not eligible for any types of overhead, and so do not include these in your budget. Some of the notable eligible costs that we have questions about are regarding manufacturing costs, consulting fees, and PWLE compensation, all of which are eligible expenditures within our program that BioCanRx can support. And in terms of the matching requirements that I referenced on each of those program-specific slides, this must be met using matching partner funds, and that is not to be confused with leveraged funds. The 2 points made here in red, or the last 2 bullet points here, are particularly important to reference, especially for those of you who may have applied to us before. So this first point is that all BioCanRx funds must be fully expended by March 31st, 2029. This date aligns with when our current funding cycle ends. That said, proposed projects can apply for a 3-year award or a 3-year term. We just expect that you're spending our funds within the first 2 years of that award. And so when you're thinking about this, essentially what that looks like for you is that it's still feasible over a 3-year term. It's still a budget that allows a 3-year runway. It just means essentially that BioConX requests for funding and for the activities would fall in those first 2 years. And this is something that we'll articulate again at the point of full application when there's an expectation that you submit a full budget. And so for this final bullet point here, again in red, new this year as well, we are asking investigators to put a budget line item for activities relating or travel accommodations relating to attendance to the Summit for Cancer Immunotherapy. As a BioCanRx funded investigator, there is an expectation that our PIs and their trainees are attending the Summit for CI. And new this year, we're asking that you put this as a line item in your budget because we're not otherwise funding in the previous mechanism that we had done through an independent travel award. Okay, so now we're going to dive a little bit into partner funds and talk a little bit more about these. So matching funds essentially are those that are eligible. They must, and so I'll just go down this list a little bit verbatim. So essentially, to qualify as a matching fund, the fund must be spent on eligible activities. They must be received from eligible sources. Um, they should be received in the fiscal year of the BioCanRx award or of the same fiscal year that the monies from BioCanRx will be spent. And again, there's a lot of nuance here. We've seen a lot of unique cases that are all eligible. So again, if you have questions about this, don't hesitate to reach out to us. They must be used to fulfill matching requirements. Sorry, they must not be used to fulfill matching requirements. Essentially, we don't want to see double dipping. That would be considered a leveraged fund, not a matching fund. So some common examples of matching funds are provincial grants for research personnel salaries, industry support, both in kind, and then cash would be acceptable fund as well, charitable contribution, cash contributions to salaries, materials and supplies, and other eligible costs. Common examples of leverage funds are tri-council funding, for example, NRC funding, and funds that are spent on non-eligible expenses. So for instance, major equipment costs. So just to break out what this would look like, essentially, if the total eligible project cost is 1.5 million and BioCanRx contributes 750 million, I wish, 750,000, then we would expect that the matching funding is 750,000, representing the 50% match. And so if, for example, there's funding coming from other federal sources, just by way of one example, these are considered leverage funds. I will highlight here that we absolutely welcome, and there's an opportunity for you to highlight your leveraged funds. At the stage of the full application, you may wish to get letters of support from or letters of commitment from those leveraged funds to speak to the feasibility of your project. It's just that those do not count toward the match that is required of our program. In terms of the clinical trial, very similar. This is a scenario that essentially outlines where monies could come from that would constitute, in this case, a 60% match for our 40% commitment of $1 million. Okay, and moving on, I don't think it's necessary to speak to this. It's in our program guide. Of course, if anyone has questions, I'm happy to address them. The purpose of this slide, though, is just to bring your attention to the fact that BioCanRx, as a federally funded entity, does support, align, and endorse the Government of Canada's Buy Canadian policy. And so while it's not mandated for our program, we do recommend that you take a close look at that. And we do ask for justifications for example, when you're spending funds somewhere else versus if a service is offered in Canada or materials or whatever, what may have you. This helps us align and better understand where the needs and where the gaps may be, but it also is something that that we may hear become mandated through our funding. So again, if you have any questions about that, I would welcome them. So moving on to another section, another requirement, and that is what we are calling the future product and or enabling technology development trajectory. Um, this is not outlined in this way in the program guide, so I'll reference this as supplemental information. This very closely aligns to the requirements at the full application stage, but I think it speaks to the substantially developed element or substantially developed in Canada and also to the benefit of Canada. So I thought I would outline these activities here. Essentially, what this is getting at is what is the future of your product, and does it ultimately have a pathway that supports its commercial development, that fits in with the IP that you have, that has a commercialization need, and that ultimately has impact and benefit again for Canada and patients in Canada. So again, if anyone has any questions about this, I would be happy to answer them. Another element of our application is this section that is 5.9, and that is where we ask you to outline a patient, or excuse me, a person with lived or living experience as a partner in your funded project work. And so this is something that we expect at the time of the full application. But as you probably know, earlier is better. This really does lead to a more meaningful partnership between the PWLE and your research group. And so we've put a number of different resources in the program guide that really have been mindfully curated by my colleague Anu Shukla-Jones, who's on the call here. She, I'm sure, could jump in and answer questions. And also from members of our CCP community who also weighed in and provided feedback of this section. Anu is also there and welcomes engagement if you are seeking support to make connections with individuals looking to become patient partners on your project. So again, don't hesitate to reach out as early as now. In terms of the next section, I would highlight that this is not a new section. We've already had this, but it's new requirements. And this section has been changed a little bit and is really it's met or it's developed to meet best practices for research excellence. And so here we're asking not only about what does the training look like in terms of the technical expertise that your highly qualified personnel will receive, but what does it look like in the context of an inclusive research environment? And so we'll be asking questions about what the research environment looks like, recruitment practices, mentorship, and career support. And so the next section, again, it's new requirements. It's not a new section. This was previously called our EDI section, and now we've called it our Inclusive Research Design section, which again is really to bring us up to speed in terms of best practices in this space. And so essentially, this is a non-exhaustive list, but essentially we're asking you to define how your research addresses equality, equity, accessibility, and representation across diverse patient populations, how it incorporates considerations related to Indigenous rights, cultural safety, and meaningful engagement with affected communities. How you're considering social, demographic, biological, and gender-related factors that may influence the outcomes, participation, and ultimate benefit to these patients, and asking you to define how it accounts for real-world patient needs, including comorbidities, standard of care, disease progression, age, and other relevant treatment practices. And so in terms of the application requirements, I quickly and briefly mentioned that not all of these are required for the stage of the letter of intent. And this table is identifying which elements of of the call of the program of our requirements are needed at the LOI stage versus the full application. I would highlight this table is not in our program guide, but it is also found on the landing page of our website. So now moving on to the evaluation criteria, this aligns with section 6 and 7 of our program guide. This is a very high level, non-exhaustive oh my gosh, a high level, non-exhaustive list of the evaluation criteria highlights. So the first thing that I would mention is that there are program-specific evaluation criteria, and essentially these are about fit to the program in which you are applying and alignment to the necessary end deliverables. There are also criteria at the letter of intent and full application stages. And so here I would highlight that our LOIs are evaluated. They're not simply screened for fit. And then finally, as I mentioned in the last couple of slides, we do have some new application elements related to the training, development, and inclusive research environment, so section 5.10, and also to the inclusive research design component, which is section 5.11. So for this competition, these will be assessed based on a satisfactory, not satisfactory basis and will not be incorporated into the ultimate funding score. The rationale behind this is that these are new, and we are really trying to learn from each other and have this be a dynamic opportunity um, to have this be a requirement, but also to see where the needs are and to try to support the needs in our future funding competitions. So I would say stay tuned. We'll have more to say about this in the coming year or so. And as this process continues, there will also be, of course, a lot more information at the full application stage, which is where we ask our applicants to outline their activities in this space. So in terms of the key elements to a strong proposals, these, of course, tie very closely in with the criteria, the evaluation criteria. But at a 30,000-foot view, what we're looking for are strong scientific proposals that have an innovative element that are made in Canada and that ultimately support BioCanRx's mandate in terms of scope and programmatic fit, and that have a benefit to Canada in terms of the clinical, social, and/or economic benefit. We are looking for multidisciplinary and collaborative teams with the requisite expertise because we know the challenges that come with translational research at all stages, and this takes a village. We are, as I mentioned, looking for linkages with core facilities, and also we are looking at CSEI projects more favorably when they relate to our enabling studies or clinical trials projects. And then, as I mentioned, and I'll maybe take 1 minute just to say that feasibility is important. So for all of these programs, they have clear milestones and deliverables. There should be clear outputs that are defined by you as the applicant. And this is something that will be evaluated by our international committee of peer reviewers, our research management committee, along with all of these other elements. And we're getting close to the end. We're almost ready for Q&A. So if you haven't already and have some questions, now is a good time to start asking them. But let's move on now to the final section, and that is the timelines and application process. So as I mentioned, it's a two-stage process. I'm sort of leaving at a stage. So I'll start by saying that we do ask for a notice of intent. This is a simple email that is letting us know your intent to apply and to which program. And if you have other details, such as a proposed project title, that would be fabulous too. Just allows us to do some administrative work on the back end. And then the LOI is due on July 29th. The notification of results of the LOI is early October. Full application is December 4th, 2026. I guess all of these have been 2026 so far. And then the award start date is March 31st, likely March 2027. So March 31st, 2027 for the awards start date. In terms of process and requirements, I should say, for the LOI, essentially this outlines what is necessary for our enabling studies, clinical trial, and CSEI programs, and also for the core facilities programs. And again, this is specific to the LOI stage. So in terms of what we're asking of you, essentially it's just to reiterate, it is to submit an NOI first via email, and that should be in the chat box. It is to submit a letter of intent, and we'll talk about how in a moment. These are evaluated by our research management committee. They make the decisions about whether or not the application and the project is invited to submit a full application. You'll receive comments either way, whether you're invited or not. And for those that are invited to the full application, in many cases, there will be feedback from the Research Management Committee, and there is an expectation that you address those comments as part of your full application. So we are using a grant management program called Optimi to do the intake of these applications. And so essentially, again, there should be a link coming in your chat box. This is also found in the guidelines document, but all of the information should be pretty straightforward. There are instructions included on the landing page for how to actually use Optimi. You're able to create an account or rather, you must create an account to access the forums. And if you have collaborators or program managers that are supporting the application, you can add them or they can add others as collaborators directly in the Optimi platform. You'll also be receiving all of the information in terms of the steps forward through Optimize. So in terms of the notification of the application status, the invitation to full application, and all other relevant competition application related material information through Optimize. And so for the sake of time, I didn't cover some of the sections that are required either at the LOI or the full application stage, simply because of time and because these generally speaking have not warranted frequently asked questions. That said, though, I would be very happy to talk about them or to answer any questions that you may have regarding this or any of the things that I spoke about so far. And so I'll just leave my email here again. I would also highlight that all of the information that I talked about today is either found in the program guide or in a couple of cases supplements the program guide. And then we're here too. We're happy to support any questions that you have if you think of them in the middle of the night after you've had this riveting informational webinar, but we are happy to support. So with that being said, I'm going to stop sharing my slides because I can't see anything going on here, and look at the Q&A if there are any Q&As. And so folks, if someone could offer tech support, I'm not sure I see a Q&A, but I do see the webinar chat. Is that what we're using for? Oh no, there's Q&A as well. Okay. So excuse me. So the question in the Q&A is, would a clinical trial with an ADC be within the scope of this funding opportunity? Yes, it would be. And again, if you have any specific questions, happy to answer those. Okay. So another question came in of, are there more rounds of applications in future years? We sure hope so. This is very likely to be the last competition that we offer through our current funding cycle, which ends March 31st, 2029. But stay tuned. We really hope that we'll continue as an organization and continue to fund these types of programs. The other thing is that we are always looking for opportunities to fund our Catalyst program. This is a program that has been sought after. We just unfortunately cannot fund it in this competition. But for those of you who may have interest in partnering, we welcome that as well. So in terms of, yeah, so in terms of the question regarding we're looking to apply to core funding, I'm hoping to find ways to support non-core groups applying. Is there a channel to support this? So I'd suggest reach out to us directly. If you have us, if you can provide us a sense of what your core facility does, we know who's in our ecosystem, and that might be a way right now to develop those informal linkages. And then in terms of supporting the next stages, essentially what we'll be doing, and just re-articulate it at the stage that we have the project, the application intake. So at the LOI stage, we will be doing a much more formal matchmaking in the sense that we'll be reaching out to those who have applied for core facility funding to say, hey, these are all the projects that have applied through the project stream, and then to the individuals applying to enabling clinical trial and CSCI, for example, usually not, but perhaps, here are the core or the groups applying to core, and we say talk to each other essentially and do it that way. So I think that that is how I'd answer that. Yeah, perfect. Okay, sorry, a little long-winded, but I'm glad we got there. In terms of what are required qualifications for the lead applicant. So at the bare minimum, it is essentially that you are eligible to receive Tri-Council funding, that you are at an institution that is eligible to receive Tri-Council funding, or you're at an Indigenous organization or Indigenous formally an Indigenous government. And again, I can provide more details about that. In terms of other qualifications, this isn't a requirement per se, but I mean, when we're looking, or when the RMC is looking at teams, really they're looking at the individuals having the expertise required to advance this therapeutic. And so that speaks more to the team, but is an important element to the application. Okay, and the next question is for core facility programs, can you please tell us how the proposals should be presented to show innovation toward cancer research? For instance, purchasing new equipment or supporting new projects in that field. So essentially, we're going to have questions that allow you to essentially provide a core facility CV where you identify the projects that you've supported previously, the activities that you're doing. We ask what your facility expansion or technology advancements may look like. And in terms of if the question is purchasing new equipment, this is an eligible expense, but it has to come with a pretty strong argument for why that's necessary and why it's not otherwise found in the ecosystem. So again, I hesitate to give more detail because I think it is a unique circumstance, but I'd say reach out if you have further questions about that. Yeah. Um, so is it possible to file one application for both the enabling clinical trial, or are they naturally linked? Or and no, I'd say apply to one. It would be one, yeah, I'd say apply to one. I will say, and again, I'd refer to the program guidelines, but we do allow a bit of an activities bleed between the enabling studies and the clinical trial. So as long as your clinical trial can get you that CTA within the 6 months, if you're asking for funding to do, I don't know, the final GMP manufacture, that could be a cost that's both in the enabling studies program or technically in the clinical trial application. So so you could certainly think about it from what is it that you're looking to support. But again, I'd really come back to the project program specific feasibility, and are you able to get to that CTA in 6 months, or are it for the clinical trial program, or are you able to get to that CTA, the clinical trial application or CMC package for the enabling studies program, and think about it that way. Um, so for the second question, for this competition, unless it's an Indigenous organization, it should be an academic and or research group. Now, an academic center affiliate, I'd say reach out, or if you're comfortable, you could certainly put it in the chat. But in terms of non-profit academic cooperative groups, I'd need to learn more to give you a precise and accurate answer. Okay. Sure. Yeah. So the Buy Canadian component is, and sorry, the question was, would you mind touching on the new Buy Canadian requirement? I will say it's not a requirement per se. It's an endorsement of the federal government's Buy Canadian policy. And so bear with me for one moment. I am just going to pull something up on my screen because I don't want to misread exactly what it says. This is on page 14. This is section 5.6.4 of the document, and apologies here, I'm just pulling it up right now. Um, so essentially, the policy is again, I guess as background, the government of Canada had announced an extension of the application of the Buy Canadian policy to its grants and contribution program. And because of BioCanRx's funding through the Strategic Science Fund, this applies to organizations like us. And so essentially the verbiage that was provided by the government and that we endorse is that we recommend and encourage you to consider alignment with this objective and these definitions to the extent that they are practicable and do not impede your ability to deliver on existing objectives while ensuring that costs are minimized. And so there are a number of definitions about what a Canadian supplier looks like, Canadian good, Canadian service, et cetera. And those are found in the guidelines document. And of course, the devils are in the details there. But essentially, from BioCanRx's perspective, I would say that our mandate, again, I've said it a few times, but is to support Canada and Canadian patients. And so if there's an opportunity and there is a way to support an activity that is in Canada, for instance, manufacturing costs of a vector, for example, or through our core facilities, then we really encourage you to do that. And if that's not the case, then we do ask for a justification. And though it's not a requirement, the Research Management Committee may provide recommendations or feedback regarding that decision. So it has to be well justified. Um, So no, biotechs can apply directly for funding, but they are a key element and a key partner in our programs. They're a key receptor of many of their innovations. And so they can apply directly, but they can certainly contribute and partner with our academically funded program leads to support partner matching, for example, to support letters of support, to support some of the activities that are taking place in the biotech. But no, they cannot apply directly for funding. Um, yeah, okay. So the next question is, could you clarify the distinction of match funds versus leveraged funds for the 50% match? So essentially, match funds are those that are deemed as eligible um, through SSF. And so essentially, maybe let's just talk about the definition of leveraged fund here first. I'm just going to pull up the precise definition here. So leveraged funds essentially are defined, not essentially, but verbatim are defined in our program guide as existing investments in the STNI ecosystem that are being leveraged to further the objectives of a funded research project. They include cash or in kind from federally funded entities. For example, CFI, if you have infrastructural support, organizations primarily funded by the federal government and from federal departments and agencies. So classic examples of leveraged funds are tri-council funding, as I mentioned, CFI and NRC are the ones that we are asked about the most. So in terms of directly addressing your question, the 50% match for the Enabling Studies program has to come from matched funding. And so the definition of match funding is new or incremental contributions of either cash or in kind for eligible expenditures that would not exist in the absence of a BioCanRx award via this competition. And so this could include private sector contributions, it could include provincial awards, it could include charitable contributions or foundation money, for instance, from your academic or hospital affiliated foundation. But essentially, the idea here is that it's an add-on to the activities that BioCanRx is supporting. And again, I'm reading the definition. There are certainly opportunities for conversation about how you might be able to fit any funding that you currently have, and make it work for you and make it fit our eligibility criteria. But we are certainly happy to work with you to think about how that might happen in an accurate way. Mhm. And I don't think, so I think we've answered all the questions coming in. I'm happy. Oh, every time I think there's no more questions, I see a new one, and I'm happy about this. Okay, the next question is: Are academic startup spinouts that are still working out of the university lab classified as biotech, or are they, or do they need to find matching funding from another external source? Um, it de it depends where the funding is going. I mean, it has to go to an academic researcher that that is eligible still to receive Tri-Council funding. We certainly have funded in the past uh, individuals who wear two hats, for instance. And so they have an SME that was founded out of IP and that have since spun out. In terms of the nuance of your question about working out of the university classified lab, I mean, I think so, but it's a good question that I'm a little hesitant to say with certainty. My answer is soft yes, but if you don't mind reaching out to me, and for everyone else, we'll include an FAQ specifically for questions that I can't address. I don't want to give you the wrong information. Yeah, sorry about that. Okay, and we'll stay on for another 5 minutes. So as those questions percolate, I will absolutely um, be happy to continue answering them. And one came in, and that is, would a small molecule found to synergize with an anti-PD-L1 be eligible for this funding? Uh, yes, but let's talk more. We have certainly funded non biologics before that, for instance, enhance the yield of a therapeutic. It's case by case, and that's a conversation that I'd probably want to loop in a few other folks from our team on. Yeah. And so I think probably folks are starting to drop off. So thank you very much for attending. Um, I'll say it again. Please don't hesitate reaching out. You know where to find us now. And for those who don't, or even those who do, happy writing. We hope to see your applications. And kudos to everyone doing this work. It's really to see the project intake. So happy writing. And so long, everyone that's taking off. And those who are still hanging on, if you have any other questions, again, I'm here.